Kyle Morgan ran his hand along the wooden bed frame and checked the joints one more time, because everything had to be perfect when someone would trust it with their weight during sleep. The workshop smelled like fresh-cut timber and metal shavings, and the low hum of the station life support systems provided steady background noise that he barely noticed anymore after 2 years aboard the research outpost. The door chimed, and he looked up to see Zara standing in the entrance, and her 7-foot frame nearly touched the top of the doorway. She wore her usual dark uniform that marked her as Crin's security liaison, and her silver skin caught the workshop lights in a way that made her look like she was carved from metal instead of flesh. "Come in," he said, and wiped his hands on his work pants because sawdust covered everything in his workspace. She stepped inside and moved with that careful, controlled grace her people always showed, and her amber eyes scanned the room like she was assessing threats even here in the safest part of the station. "I have a question about human furniture," she said, and her voice carried that slight growl all Crin had, but hers sounded tired underneath. "Sure," he replied, and set down his tools because Zara never asked questions without good reason. "What do you need?" "The sleeping platforms in standard quarters are uncomfortable," she said, and looked away like admitting discomfort caused her shame. "My people sleep in energy suspension fields, and I do not understand how to rest properly on your flat surfaces." Kyle nodded and gestured toward the bed frame he had been working on, because this was something he could actually help with. "Humans need different support than Crin," he explained, "and we spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping, so we take it seriously. How long have you been having trouble resting?" 3 months, she admitted quietly, and that was how long she had been stationed here. "I have not had proper sleep since arriving, but I cannot request accommodations officially because that would suggest weakness." He studied her face and noticed the tension in her jaw and the way she held her shoulders too high like every muscle was locked tight. "That is not weakness," he said gently, "and that is your body telling you it needs something different. Let me show you what options we have." Kyle walked to the storage area where he kept various mattress samples and cushioning materials, and Zara followed with careful steps like she expected the floor to give way. He pressed his hand into a memory foam pad and it compressed under his palm, then slowly returned to shape. "This material responds to weight and heat," he explained, "and it distributes pressure evenly, so no single point bears too much load. Your people are heavier and taller than humans, so you would need something firmer, but the principle is the same." Zara reached out hesitantly and touched the foam with one clawed finger, and her eyes widened slightly when it yielded under her touch. "Why do humans value softness?" she asked, "and her people view this as weakness that makes warriors slow?" Kyle considered his answer carefully because this was about more than just mattresses. "Softness is not weakness," he said, "and it is recovery. Warriors need to heal. Between battles and athletes need rest, between training and even the strongest materials need time without stress, or they break. Humans learned that comfort helps us survive longer and fight better. When we need to." Zara was quiet for a long moment, and her hand still rested on the foam like she was testing whether it would betray her. "I am very tired," she finally whispered. "And on my world we cannot show fatigue because others see it as opportunity to challenge your position. I volunteered for this station because I hoped being away from my people would let me breathe." Something in Kyle's chest tightened at the exhaustion in her voice. "I can build you something," he offered, "and something designed for your frame and weight that will let you actually rest. Would you trust me to do that?" She looked at him with those amber eyes, and he saw surprise there, like trust was not something she expected to be offered. "Yes," she said simply. Kyle spent the next hour taking measurements and asking questions about Crin physiology, while Zara answered with increasing openness. She explained how her people slept standing because lying down was a vulnerable position that their predator ancestors could not risk. She described the energy fields that supported their weight and prevented muscle strain during their brief rest cycles, but here on the station those fields were not available, and the standard beds did not support her properly, and her body was paying the price. Kyle sketched designs and calculated load requirements and explained each choice as he worked, because he wanted her to understand what he was building, and why Zara watched him with focused intensity. and asked questions that showed she was really trying to understand human thinking. Why? Do you spend so much time on comfort? She asked, when you could use that energy for defensive systems or weapons. Because taking care of people is how humans survive, he replied. And we are not the strongest or fastest species, but we are very good at making sure everyone gets what they need to keep going. That is our strength. Zara tilted her head in that way Kryn did when processing new concepts. My people would call this soft, she said, but there was less certainty in her voice than before. The following days, Kyle worked on the bed frame during his off hours and used reinforced materials that could handle Kryn weight without breaking. He designed it lower to the ground because falling distance mattered for someone who was not used to sleeping horizontally. He added cushioned railings disguised as decorative elements because Zara might need something to grab if she felt vulnerable. Lying down. Each choice was about safety presented as comfort. Zara visited the workshop every day, and at first she claimed she wanted to monitor progress, but Kyle noticed she stayed longer each time. She began asking questions about other human customs, and why families displayed pictures, and why people decorated their quarters, and why humans gave gifts without expecting payment. Kyle answered honestly and explained that humans built connections through small gestures, and that making someone else comfortable made humans feel good. 2. One evening, Zara arrived and found Kyle installing the mattress on the completed frame. The bed stood solid and strong, and the deep blue fabric he had chosen reminded him of Earth oceans. She approached slowly and ran her hand along the wooden headboard and traced the grain with careful attention. You built this, she said, and not a machine. I built it. Kyle confirmed. And humans like making things with our hands because it means something different than fabrication. This was made specifically for you, Zara. Looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. On my world, no one makes anything for another without dominance or debt, she said, and her voice was rough. This confuses me. Kyle smiled slightly and gestured to the bed. Try it, he suggested, and you should know if it works. Zara hesitated, and every line of her body showed conflict between curiosity and lifelong training. Finally, she sat down slowly on the edge, and the frame did not creak or shift. Her eyes widened as the mattress compressed under her weight and provided support. This is strange, she murmured, and then carefully swung her legs up and lay back fully. Kyle watched her face and saw the exact moment her muscles began to relax because her shoulders dropped and her jaw unclenched and her eyes closed briefly. When she opened them again, they were brighter, and he realized she was fighting tears. I did not know, she whispered, and I did not know things could feel like this. Like what? Kyle asked, gently. Safe, she said, and the word came out broken, like I could lower my defenses and nothing would hurt me, and like someone thought about what I needed and cared enough to create it. Kyle sat down carefully in his work chair and gave her space to feel whatever she was feeling. That is what humans do best, he said quietly. And we make safe spaces for each other. Zara stared up at the ceiling and her hands gripped the mattress edge. I have been a warrior since I was young enough to hold a blade, she said, and I have fought in 12 conflicts and led security teams on 6 stations, and I have never once been allowed to admit I was tired. Watching you build something meant purely for comfort has affected me more than any battle. Your people would mock this work as frivolous, she continued, but I see it now as strength. I never learned creating peace instead of winning fights and offering rest instead of demanding endurance, Kyle. You have shown me something my entire culture considers impossible. What is that? He asked. That being gentle is a choice that requires courage, she said. And that caring for others is not weakness but a different kind of power. Will you teach me this human way? Kyle felt warmth spread through his chest because this was why humans went to space, and not to conquer, but to share what they learned about survival. I will teach you, he promised, and we can start simple. Allowing yourself to rest is the first lesson. Zara nodded, and her eyes were already growing heavy, because her body was finally giving her permission to stop fighting. Thank you, she murmured, and not just for the bed, but for showing me that strength and gentleness are not enemies. You are welcome anytime you need a place to lower your guard. Kyle said softly. Zara smiled slightly, and it transformed her face from warrior to just someone who was deeply tired and finally safe. She let her eyes close and her breathing deepened, and within minutes she was asleep. Kyle returned to his workbench and began sketching his next project because Zara would need other things and a proper chair and soft lighting and maybe cushions. He worked quietly and kept watch without watching because that was what humans did. They created spaces where others could be vulnerable and they stood guard.